Will the latest pledges by the US and China usher in a new era for climate diplomacy? Hello, I'm Taimur Nabili. You're watching Between the Lines. Now, ministers and officials from 170 nations are in the German city of Bonn, getting ready for yet another round of UN climate talks. And for once, a sense of optimism that's rarely seen at such meetings. Positive announcements by the world's two largest greenhouse gas producers have raised hopes of a possible breakthrough. On Monday, the US announced its boldest plan yet to fight climate change. New rules to cut emissions from power plants by 30% from 2005 levels before 2030. The power sector is the largest single source of carbon dioxide emissions that cause climate change. Now, 24 hours later, China followed up, saying that from 2016 it'll set an absolute cap on its carbon emissions. It's the first time that Beijing has suggested an absolute limit on its greenhouse gas emissions. So what does it all add up to? With me in the studio are David Vincent, who's the Southeast Asia Regional Director for Climate Change and Energy at the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office. He's based here at the British High Commission in Singapore. And Alex Hildebrand is with the World Health Organization. He's a technical officer for sanitation, water and environmental health at the WHO Western Pacific Office in Manila. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Let me begin with the big picture, if I might. What did you make of the announcement from the US and the suggestion from Beijing that they're taking this seriously now?
I think it's probably important to put the announcements in context. It's not the first announcement, the announcements that either the US or China have made, which have been helpful in the climate change context. The US already has a target to reduce emissions by 17% by 2020, and China has an emissions intensity reduction target of 40 to 45% by 2020. So targets are already in place. In China, there's also been some initiatives around carbon pilot carbon trading.
So do these new comments go beyond the existing commitments?
They go further. I think you're right in your introduction to say that they're the boldest announcements yet. It's probably also important to put them in the context of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change assessment report, fifth assessment report, which is the clearest warning yet by the world scientists of the future we face if we fail to keep climate change below 2 degrees. In the context of the negotiation, what do we, the UK, think this adds up to, and what do we think is important? We've always found distinctions between the developed world and the developing countries, understandable as they may be, to not be helpful in the context of the negotiations. Parties agreed in the COP in Warsaw that they would come to Paris in a little over 18 months with their contribution to the new agreement, and that contribution will take the form of some kind of commitment to reduce, on a country-by-country basis, to reduce emissions. Now, that's a contribution that we need to see from all countries, whether they are developed or developing.
All right, we'll come on to that. Let's stick for a moment, Alex, with the US and the China situation. Now, the suggestion being that perhaps they're not as significant as the media is making out. And certainly if you look at the fact that they're baselining 2005 in the US as their target here, would suggest that it's perhaps not as significant as the top line would imply. What did you make of the whole thing?
Well, of course, we have also been hearing criticism because some people say, yes, it's 30%, but actually it's only 15% because it's only 40% that these cuts will make out of the emissions, the total emissions. But for us in the health sector, these are great news because we really welcome such big countries to make such a symbolic decision when we see that for us climate change is maybe the most significant environmental factor that affects health in this century. So we lack awareness about the impact of climate change on health, and we are really hoping that this will help us.
But these announcements contain nothing about the health aspects of climate change. Indeed, health is rarely talked about in the context of climate change.
Health is rarely talked about, although the impact on health is very visible when you talk about the heat wave that's struck the European countries years back, where we had a total of 70,000 extra deaths because of the 3 weeks of heat wave, then it's easy to make the relationship, but we certainly have a strong relationship between, for instance, the breeding of mosquitoes in areas where before the mosquitoes were not able to survive, right? So we are seeing, like in Himalaya, we are seeing malaria going up, we are seeing dengue expanding tremendously in most cities. So it is a challenge for us to bring that equation into the media, but this news will help us certainly.
Is there a reason, though, for cynicism? I mean, for the two of you who work daily on this issue and are committed to making change happen, and you're always looking for the positive and looking for people who are on the same wavelength as you. So I'm wondering whether your perceptions might not be the same as the perceptions of ordinary people sitting in the background, because what they're seeing to a large extent is a lot of gerrymandering, horse trading. In the US, you've already got the political arguments coming in, you've got the people criticizing the baseline effect, you've got people saying, look, this hasn't even begun to get through the congressional process, the corporate process of challenge, the legal process that may come along. Obama may be just using this as a political tool, or am I being overly cynical about this?
I think we don't know what's going to happen at COP21 in Paris. We can't tell, but what we do hope is that countries will take their responsibility seriously, whether they're developed or developing countries, and they will come forward with offers to mitigate their emissions which are transparent and verifiable and fair, so that when we're at COP21 in Paris, negotiators can look each other in the eye and they can say, this is our offer, this is what we're going to do, whether it's the US, whether it's the UK, whether it's China, and we will have time to discuss and to examine those contributions. And what we hope is that we'll have the sum of contributions in Paris which get us an agreement which delivers on this 2-degree target.
But is it your sense, and you talk to a lot of people in this regard at diplomatic level, and I don't want to put you on the spot in your working on this, but you know, the fact remains, what we need to see is actual action. And a lot of people talk about this, and COP goes on every year and we come away from it and people forget about it. Is there actual commitment at government level? Because the media tends to cover the public reaction, the media tends to cover a lot of the skepticism from scientists, or those few scientists who do make a noise. I want to know whether governments are actually really committed to all of this, and whether this symbolic move by Obama may actually change that level of commitment.
I mean, you're right to talk about the need for real-world action, and I think that's a kind of clear message. There'll be no point in countries turning up in Paris making ambitious mitigation offers unless they're actually able to deliver those mitigation cuts post-2020. So the other thing we need to see, the two things we need to see are the new ambitious global climate agreement, but we need to see countries preparing programs in country which will actually deliver those kind of cuts. I think if you examine the Obama administration, it's very clearly aimed at the power industry. So there are countries that are approaching this on a kind of sector-by-sector basis, but we're going to need to see, certainly in the energy sector globally, not just in the US, but globally, a shift towards lower carbon forms of energy, because it's energy, and particularly growing energy demand in the developing world, which is going to be a big determinant of future greenhouse gas emissions after 2020.
Alex, to what extent do you see commitment actually translating into physical changes on the ground? The problems that you outlined a moment ago, how much is being done to actually address those?
Well, we cannot be very ambitious. We are aware of the strong interests for non-action in the climate change arena. But we've seen that elsewhere. When we started the fight against the tobacco industry, everybody told us, forget it, you will never manage. Yes, and we have today a success story. We're now trying also to convince the need to promote healthy diets. That is not an easy task, because there are also vested interests there that make our work difficult. So the decision or the declarations by these two leaders for us are symbolically very important, because, as you also mentioned, this will influence other countries to go along, and what we need is political commitment, although, even as you mentioned also, it's not all about health, but but it helps us. So we are positive, although it could be much better. We would ask for more, but taking the history of climate change, I think this is quite an important day.
Let me finish off with one more devil's advocate question for you. They may be cutting back on coal burning in the United States, and perhaps China will also follow suit. But what we've seen in the US over the past few years is as the coal domestic burning falls because of the fracking that's going on and the increased gas use, they're just shipping that coal overseas. They're not leaving it in the ground. The coal is still finding its way into the atmosphere, and there are always developing countries for which coal is the cheap alternative for development. Is enough being done to sort of push this commitment down to the second order levels and beyond their immediate concerns?
I think all countries in the world are struggling with energy. They're struggling with increasing energy demands, and they're asking themselves how they're going to meet that increasing energy demand and supply safe, affordable energy. But we would say we need secure energy, we need affordable energy, but we also need energy that's low carbon. You're right to say that there are plans in Southeast Asia for the building of new coal-fired power plants. We make the point to our colleagues here that energy and climate policy need to be joined up. So we would certainly countries really examining their energy policy and making the most of the carbon opportunities around things like renewable energy, and also grasping the real opportunities that energy efficiency offers, not just in this region but globally. So there may be no need for these new plants to come on stream.
All right, there we'll have to leave it, gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed. David Vincent, Alex Hildebrand, talking to us this evening. We'll continue with this theme of conversation in a slightly different note after the break, where we'll talk about planning for a sustainable city in the face of climate change. We have with us a mayor who's spearheading those efforts in his city. Stay with us for that.